Hello, my friends. Welcome back. So today we will be reading chapter number 30 in the Crescent Stone. We are definitely, let's see. Oh, we're well into the final quarter of the book. So that's pretty exciting. We don't have much longer. I'm guessing maybe 2 weeks left, something like that. Here's a question for you. Have you ever done something nice or good for someone else that put you at risk? I'm thinking about, I had a friend, well, not a friend. We had a family friend who was helping someone with something, and there was a misunderstanding. He got shot at. Yeah, anyway. What I'm thinking is there a time you helped someone and there was a misunderstanding, or you helped someone and by stopping to help them, you put yourself at risk? Okay, let's see. Everybody's starting to say hello. Caitlin's here. Hello, Caitlin. Patrick is here. He says, hey, Matt. Hey, Patrick. Let's see. Sarah says, good afternoon. Thanks to you explaining your family's game. About every 15 minutes, we have a chorus of Shield being yelled around our house, no matter what else is going on. Oh, no. You guys are playing Brain Shield. Oh, that's terrible. Two of my daughters are kind of they came up with it and played it together. And so they're sort of the arbiters of what counts and what doesn't, which is not fair. I keep trying to introduce new Brain Shield things, but new like ways of doing things, but they don't accept my contributions, which is too bad. Brain Shield! One of my kids was just walking toward me. Man, rude. Right on the air, too. Dr. Awesome says she is still dreaming of yesterday's cheddar. That was delicious. And you know what I realized later? I realized that I actually had leftover pad thai from our local Thai restaurant. And I had forgotten that I had it, which would have been much easier to make. But I have no regrets because I ate the pad thai today for lunch, which was great. Let's see. The kids have a question. Can they steal animals' brains too? What about friends over video calls? Okay, here's my understanding. Animal brains, sure. No, one of my kids is saying no to animal brains. I've seen animal brains get stolen before. All right, here comes Allie to explain.
Okay, here's the thing. No, you can't steal animal brains. It's a completely different category. It's a completely different thing. This game is meant to be played among the humans, not your animals.
Okay.
Also, it can get pretty crazy as the games get more intense. You don't want your animals to get, caught in the crossfire.
We did actually. There was a time I was sitting on the couch holding the rabbit, or Allie was holding the rabbit.
Yeah.
And the kids had forgotten that they weren't shielded, and I started taking brains, and everyone freaked out, and the rabbit went flying, like just running away. It was drama. How about video calls? I've seen you guys doing it over video calls.
Yes, you can steal. So Brain Shield, you can steal a brain over video calls. Now, it's important to remember that you still have to make the slurping sound. You still have to put it into your head.
Also, you can't lie about having a brain. If someone's like, do you still have your brain? You can't be like, oh, no, someone already took it. That's not okay. You can't lie about it.
In fact, if I can show you the initial sketches of the brain game that me and Micah made, because the way that a rule gets put in place between the two of us is basically you have to draw out your idea of what's going to happen. Like, there's a machine you can use called the Brain Sucker 3000, which only works if 3 people are sitting in a line on the couch.
And then you get all the brains.
You get all the brains in one slurp.
The other really important one you need to know, and then we got to start reading, is the composter, not the composter. The composter. It's a brain composter. And what happens is after night falls, so it has to be dark, the game resets. Every morning, everyone gets their brains back. So at night, you can say you have 5 brains. It costs 1 brain to start the composter. And what happens is all of those brains are now safe. No one else can get them. They're done for the night.
So the person who composts the most brains at the end of the day, once the sun has gone down, is the winner of the game for that day.
But just a reminder, it costs 1 brain to use the composter. So, I sometimes use the composter on my own brain so no one can get it, which makes everyone mad. But that's the basics of the game. It looks like Eva agrees about the animals. They can't even protect themselves. It's true.
Good point.
All right. Dawn says, good afternoon. Hey, Dawn. Good to see you. And Milena is back after catching up on all of them yesterday. Hi. Hello. All right. We should jump in since we spent a long time talking about brain suckers. Here's where we are in the story. Madeline Oliver can't breathe except with magic. And she has magic now. Magic that is from the Ellenil. She's just discovered. Oh, Tim Tobin's here. Hey, Tim. Good to see you. Madeline has just discovered that there may be more to the story of her magic than she ever expected, and that maybe things aren't as black and white as she thought between the excellent good Ellenil and the horrific evil Scim. More to be seen. We'll get into that on Monday. Meanwhile, Jason and Bylea, who's a Cockry, a local in the Sunlit Lands, have escaped from the castle at Westwind, where the Scim were trying to capture them. And last we saw, they had escaped by jumping into the moat through the guardrobe, which is essentially the bathroom, had swum through the sewage and made it out to the other side. Bylea with a weapon, Jason without, and Bylea encouraging him that he still had done good in his day. And that's where we pick up. They're trying to protect from the Scim these artifacts that the Scim have been trying to get back. And here we go, chapter 30, the storm. I'm going to move over to the microphone a little bit here. Chapter 30, the storm. The desert claims the land, and so we must claim the desert. From the deserted city, a Cockry lament. Faster, Jason. It was a mantra Bylea repeated endlessly. His legs felt like bags filled with sand, which for all he knew, they now were. All he could see in any direction was sand. Sand dunes ahead, sand dunes to the left and right. Behind them, the other sand dunes they had passed, and sometimes the sand clouds created by their Scim pursuers. They had lost the Scim for almost 9 hours in the Tolmine Pass. Bylea knew a shortcut that required confronting an 11-foot-tall knight with glowing eyes and a scary sword made of flaming night. Apparently, she had some sort of deal going with him, though, because she said she had already paid her toll, and he let them through. The monster knight wasn't so sure about Jason, but Bylea convinced him that Jason was somehow part of the deal. Jason didn't know if the Scim went around or through the scary toll road, but it didn't take them long to get on his and Bylea's trail again. He wondered aloud how the Scim were surviving. Bylea knew every trick. Certain plants hoarded water in the mornings. She poured it along the leaves and into their mouths. She had hollowed a gourd for a canteen and saved some water for the evening. She made a sweet mashed food out of a certain cactus. It had tubers that grew among the roots, which she smashed and mixed sparingly with water. It had the consistency of paste, but the taste had grown on him. He was still getting his daily delivery of pudding, too. He shared it with Bylea, and she seemed genuinely impressed by his ability to find a new cup of, quote, this food you call pudding every morning. She warned him of the various dangers of the desert. Sandstorms, naturally. Most of the nasty desert animals you could think of from Earth, plus something called a ghoul that changed shapes to look like your friends and then ate you. And something that sounded like a hyena, sort of, except Bylea said it was, quote, as smart as a woman. He wasn't sure if that meant smarter than a man or not, but he knew not to ask. Either way, it was a hyena that was smarter than a hyena. He was glad to hear it didn't have opposable thumbs, but she said it would lay clever traps and had to be avoided. The Karobem, too, should be avoided. A strange, magical race of creature who changed shapes, a common power for desert folk, Bylea said, and were known for interceding in the business of the people of the Sunlit Lands. Massively powerful, with a magic more formidable than any other. They could settle a dispute between warring peoples in a few minutes. They rarely intervened, but when they did, it was the stuff of legend. The last time had been hundreds of years ago when they had destroyed a Cockry city called Ezerbean. Why is their magic so powerful? Jason asked. The Cockry trade in story, Bylea said. It is the foundation of our economy. Do you understand? It is like money for us. The Karobem are made of story. Jason snorted. Okay, thanks for clearing that up. They are world shapers. They alter things in a way no other magic can. They tell the world the way it should be. And it is. Jason's tongue felt thick. They hadn't stopped for a drink in hours. The sun squeezed the sweat out of him. Still, that's not the same thing as being made of story. That's like, I don't know, word magic or something. Faster, Jason, Bylea said, and for a while he didn't speak at all. Keeping up with her exhausted him, and she was going slow for him. He would be embarrassed by how easily she outpaced him, if not for the fact that he wasn't sure any person he knew would be able to keep up with her. She seemed to be on a casual holiday stroll while he was doing the most strenuous march of his life. Sometimes she would stand beside him and mark out a certain landmark, a thorny tree, maybe. She would tell him walk to it as quickly as he could. And then, if she wasn't back, he could rest until she returned. She would disappear then for spans of time as long as 20 minutes. He would stand beneath the thorn tree or lie in the narrow shade of a boulder or rest at the bottom of a dune, sweat rolling from his face, his tongue thick and dry, waiting for her to return. When she did, she would say, "Quickly, Jason." They would set off again, sometimes in the same direction, sometimes in another. She never explained why she made the choices she did, but he accepted them with mute appreciation. This time, she left him in the shade of a rock jutting up from the desert floor. It angled toward the horizon in a way that let him sit beneath the overhang in the relative coolness of the shade. Bylea disappeared, telling him to be silent and conserve his strength. She would return in time. Drowsy from the heat and exhausted from walking, he fell asleep in the shade of the stone. "Somewhere near here," a guttural voice said. "Climb up the rock over there," another replied. Jason shook himself awake. Those were Scim voices. "So the Cockry woman can fill me with arrows? Do it yourself," the second Scim grunted. "The Cockry are fearsome, but the boy, how could he have killed Night's Breath? Did you see him with the bow upon the walls of Westwind?" They both chortled. Apparently everyone had seen Jason's spectacular failure. More concerning was that the Scim, at least two of them, stood on the opposite side of this rock. He wished he had somehow walked faster all those times Bylea had told him to do so. He had to hope those two wouldn't want to break in the shade. What could he do? What should he do? Make a run for it? He didn't think he'd have much of a chance. Maybe he could bury himself in the sand if he did it slowly, so it didn't make too much sound. "This accursed sun," one of the voices said. "Oh, for the cool embrace of night. I can barely speak. My throat is so parched. Could we sit in the shade of this stone even for a few minutes? But if one of the war chiefs finds out, I will not speak of it, nor I. But how far behind is the rest of the war party?" There was a pause. No doubt they were looking back, trying to judge the distance. Jason began to carefully pile sand in his lap. He didn't think he would get himself buried in time, but he had to try something. The Scim came around the stone, still speaking to one another, and stopped still as statues when they saw Jason sitting in the shade. He sat up straight, doing his best to look like he had known they were coming and had been waiting for them. "Hello," he said. The great shambling soldiers looked at one another, uncertain what to do. One had his hand on the handle of his axe. The other stood with his mouth wide open. Jason almost laughed. When someone says hello, it's polite to say hello back. Said one of the Scim. "Hello?" Jason smiled broadly. "That's better. Now, if you don't mind being a little crowded, all three of us should be able to fit in the shade of this rock." "We have captured him," one of the Scim said. Jason decided he would call him Fluffy, because his thick black hair was in a braid that had come loose, giving him a fluffy halo. "Not true," Jason said. The second Scim, Jaws, Jason decided, because of how far his jaw had fallen open upon finding Jason sitting serenely under the rock, said, "It is true. You have no weapon. We are heavily armed. We'll be joined by our army in a few minutes' time." "Then we might as well sit in the shade and wait," Jason said. Fluffy gave him a sour frown. "We will not sit with the murderer of Night's Breath." Jaws said, nearly in the same moment, "It is a trap." A trap? Jason laughed. How could an invitation to sit in the shade be a trap? If we could see how it worked, Jaws said, it would not be a trap, would it? Jason acknowledged his point while racing through a plan to get himself out of this mess. He might be able to hold these two off, but he couldn't expect the whole Scim army to stand in the sunshine for fear of a non-existent trap. You're too clever for me, Jason admitted. He turned away from them, and when they could just barely see his face, he smirked. Wait, Fluffy cried. I saw the look on your face. Jaws said, Tell us, have we stumbled into your trap already? There is no trap, Jason said truthfully. Jaws pointed at him accusingly. Precisely what someone would say if they had set a trap. Bailea descended on them from the top of the rock, twisting her body so that each of her feet connected with one of their jaws. They fell backward, and she snatched the axe from Fluffy's belt, flinging it toward Jason. Catch! She cried. He barely avoided getting brained with the axe. He grabbed the handle and tried to lift it, but he could scarcely get it up to his shoulder. Bailea had her staff in two pieces, and she whirled like a desert wind, meeting Jaws' blade and keeping Fluffy at bay. Unable to do anything else constructive, Jason dug a hole and buried the axe. Distracted by Jaws' sword, Bailea didn't see Fluffy reach for her hand, crushing it. She cried out and dropped half of her staff. She tried to wrench away from Fluffy, but he held her hand fast, making it nearly impossible for her to parry Jaws' blows. Jason scrambled to them, snatched up the fallen half of the staff, and drove the bladed end into Fluffy's knee. Fluffy yowled and released Bailea, who brought the haft of her staff up into Jaws' face, hitting him hard enough to knock him stunned to the ground. She yanked the other half of her staff from Fluffy's knee and said, Quickly, Jason. Sorry about your knee, Fluffy, Jason called as they scrambled over a dune. My name is not Fluffy, the Scim warrior roared. Bailea made him run for almost 30 minutes. Finally, she let him collapse at the top of a dune, the sun burning his face. She crouched, facing the direction they had come. They're craftier than I supposed. The larger part of their forces was closer than I knew, while they left another small group behind to kick up dust, so we would think them in the distance. That was a close moment, indeed. Thirsty, Jason said. Bailea stood over him and shielded his face with the sleeve of her flowing shirt. There's a small oasis near here. I will need to check it first for Wilna. Those were the hyena things. Wilna. Jason thought he could fight off a pack of hyenas if he got a drink of water. First, Bailea said, I need you to bind my hand. I fear it is broken. Jason sat up immediately and gingerly took her wrist in his hand. A nasty bruise spread beneath her golden tan skin. The fingers were swollen, the center of her hand like a balloon. With her good hand, she unwrapped a long piece of cloth from around her waist. It held her loose garment close against her body. She tore a strip of it with the blade of her staff and handed it to Jason. Bind it tight, she said. He wound it around her hand. Tighter. He yanked it hard. He winced. Her face had gone pale. He didn't like to see her in pain, certainly didn't want to be the one causing her pain, but it had to be done. Still tighter, she said. She gritted her teeth, and he pulled as hard as he could. Sweat beaded her face, and she gasped. Good. Now we find water. Then we run. He helped her to her feet. She stood weak with pain for a moment. He gripped both her arms, keeping her steady. He carefully wiped the sweat from her face. Her eyes met his, and her lips parted, but before she could speak, Jason said, I know. Run faster, Jason. She leaned on him while they walked down the dune, but by the time they had climbed the next, she had transferred her staff into her wounded hand, flexing her hand and spinning the staff lightly. She sent him up one dune, the wind blowing so it obscured his footprints, and she went in another direction. The Scim were close enough, she said, that it was wise to give them a false trail. He objected, but she assured him her strength had returned. He didn't know how that was possible, but it was true that she looked better. He felt dehydrated, lightheaded, exhausted, but she looked like she could run again. She slipped away to make the false trail. After she rejoined Jason, she pointed out an oasis. Oasis. The word made him think of a palm tree with coconuts next to a pure stream. This was a muddy puddle. An animal stood beside it, lapping water. Is that a lion cub? Perhaps. Bailea squinted her silver eyes. Not all is what it seems in the desert. Jason was reminded of her stories about the many creatures of the desert who could change their shapes. The sand around the waterhole quivered. What's that? Bailea froze. So did the lion cub. A dog-sized creature shook itself free of the sand, its jaws clamping onto the cub's rear leg. The cub cried out in panic, and two more of the creatures leapt out of the sand. They looked like wild dogs with thick, cracked lips and white patches in their sandy fur. Wilna, Bailea whispered. We must go. Quickly, Jason. They're gonna eat that cub, Jason said. Better than eating us. Give me your staff, Jason said. No, Bailea said. We will not stop to fight 3 Wilna with a battalion of Scim at our backs. A faint sound came to them on the wind. The Scim, he said. They're nearby. Bailea listened. The Wilna had paused, their pointed ears pricked toward the Scim army. They're following the fake trail, she said. We must go, now. Jason had another idea. He jumped to his feet and shouted as loud as he was able. Hey, Breakbones, we're over here! He ran to the oasis. The Wilna crouched down, watching him warily. He ran full speed toward the Wilna with its maw latched on the cub. He aimed a terrific kick at its head, but at the last moment the Wilna let go, skittering away and growling at Jason. The Wilna triangulated Jason the moment he stopped moving. No matter how he turned, there was one he couldn't see. I was a kickball champion in 8th grade, he said. Get close enough and I'm going to send you sailing over the fences like a red rubber ball. The lion cub slipped away, limping. The Wilna distracted by this new, larger prey. Jason kicked toward his blind spot, hoping the third Wilna wouldn't get a bite in. He turned in a circle, trying not to let any of them out of his sight for more than a second. The Scim are going to come over that hill soon, Jason said, and when they do, we're all going to want to run. But if you want to attack them, I won't complain. The Scim were shouting, some sort of battle march. They were close. The Wilna listened, backing up slightly from Jason. The chanting grew louder, and the Wilna trotted away, one of them watching Jason over its shoulder. This way, Bailea hissed. She had crossed to the other side of the oasis. Jason fell to his chest and slurped up 3 quick gulps of water. Bailea was already running. The wind had whipped up. I outsmarted those dog things, Jason shouted. Bailea's eyes flashed. You are a fool. That stung. She was one of the only people who had never called him a fool. At least I'm consistent, he shouted back. He had saved the lion cub, at least. That was something. The wind whipped past them, kicking up sand. He heard his name and, looking back, could see the Scim loping behind him. They were much too close, and there were at least 20 of them. An arrow whistled past his ear. They're within bow shot, Bailea said. Run 20 paces ahead, then turn to the left. Run until you find a garden of stone. Climb to the top of the stones and wait for me. But what if you don't? Then I will be dead, and you will soon join me. She laughed at the look on his face. But at least the lion cub lives. She spun back, staff in hand, and shouted a high-pitched, ululating war cry. Jason counted out the 20 steps, then turned left and ran full speed. The sand stung his face. He lifted his hands, trying to shield his eyes. The wind howled, and in the distance, he heard the Wilna raise an answering howl. Cries and the sound of battle came from behind, and then he couldn't see more than a step or two ahead. Bailea appeared beside him, took his hand, and corrected his course. The sand lifted for a moment, and he saw the Scim not far behind. He saw the lion cub between them and the Scim. Or no, it wasn't the lion cub at all. It was a young girl, limping in front of the Scim as if she could stop them herself. The girl glanced at Jason and smiled. She held up her arms and shouted something, and a curtain of sand lowered over the Scim, eventually obscuring the girl as well. In the cover provided by the howling sandstorm, Bailea pulled Jason up a series of solid stones jutting out of the sand. She found a cleft in the rock, pushed him in, and followed after. She loosened her belt, more of a sash, really, carefully unfolding it until it was almost the size of a bedsheet. She lifted it So it kept out the sand, tucking it into the clefts of the rock to form a makeshift tent. They settled side by side, panting, and listened to the static of sand on stone. The end of chapter 30, and a fitting place to end for the week. We'll pick up in chapter 31 on Monday, a really important chapter where Madeline and Darius has claimed he's going to explain why he works for the Scim. So that should be exciting. We'll see how that goes. Boy. Oh, Tim says, nice to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. Hey, Tim. Yeah, it's great to see you. Let's see. A couple things. Just keep in mind, tomorrow, I'm pleased to say that Ann Nesbitt will be with us, author of Darling Darlene, Queen of the Screen, which is a middle grade adventure novel. It's not the only book she's written, but that's her most recent. I think you'll really enjoy it. So don't forget that tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. As always, Tyndale's taking orders and sending books right now. That's my publisher for the Crescent Stone and a variety of my other books, several of which you can find there. And several of my upcoming books are there as well, or will be. Crescent Stone and The Heartwood Crown, narrated by Natasha Sudek, is available from Oasis Audio at oasisaudio.com. And as always, every time you like, every time you comment, anytime you subscribe, it's only a positive for me, and it helps your friends find the great material that you also are enjoying. So I will see you tomorrow. Don't forget tomorrow to bring your questions for Anne. I would say you can ask her anything about writing, certainly about her book. If you have questions about early filmmaking, I think she could answer that, especially questions about serial storytelling. Serial meaning one story after another, right? With cliffhangers. She knows quite a bit about that. And a variety of other things. Feel free to go check out her website beforehand if you want and think of some questions. But Anne's very excited to be with us, and that'll be tomorrow. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. A pleasure as always to spend a half hour with you. And I hope the rest of your day is safe, productive, and enjoyable. I'll see you tomorrow.